You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk. And we have a very interesting guest today to talk about a topic that I'm going to get more educated on, and I'm sure all of the listeners will get more educated on, because none of us seem to be experts yet, but we have a few people, actually one on my board that's an expert in quantum, and we're going to talk about quantum computing and why it's important for the economy of the United States, why it's important for different regions in the country to be focused on quantum. And we have an individual that's been studying these characteristics and traits of quantum for quite a while. And we have Travis McCready, who is the head of industries and leasing advisory for JLL, which is one of the largest commercial real estate firms in the world. And they've been doing a lot of study on quantum. Welcome to BioTalk, Travis.
Thank you, Rich. It's great to be here.
We can't wait to get educated by you.
I'm going to lower your expectations, Rich.
Well, I don't think so. I think for 90% of the people who will be listening to this, they're going to all learn something from this for sure. But why don't we start, rather than me introducing you and your bio and resume, you can do a little self-introduction, talk about what head of industries means for leasing advisory for JLL, and a little background also on JLL for the listeners.
The easy part, JLL is the second largest commercial real estate advisory in the world. We have roughly 110,000 employees globally, every continent, all major economic and real estate markets across the world. Generally speaking, our business, it can be thought of in three separate verticals. One, the division that I am in, Leasing Advisory, is probably the area of commercial real estate that most folks are familiar with. Brokerage, consulting, and so on and so forth. That's been the bread and butter of JLL, dating back to its original founding over 140 years ago. The second division is equally important and perhaps something that we all experience day to day, and that's real estate management. It's our ability and all of the services required to keep commercial real estate up and running and fit for purpose for our use throughout the economy. It's facility management and property management services such as that, all of it aided by a technology stack that allows us to create these environments that are fit for purpose and great for your use and my use. The last area of what we do is probably the most understated and maybe even equally powerful, and that's our capital markets function. This is the financial engineering, if you will, required to fund, capitalize, create portfolios of assets, buying, selling, trading, valuing these real estate assets, and working with REITs and then others with the investment management and investment banking function associated with real estate. We have the largest such division of any commercial real estate advisory in the world. So those three together allow us to provide a real turnkey service in commercial real estate. For me, my work focuses on what we call industries. And you can think of industries as the very specific real estate categories tied to human health. And that would be our life sciences and healthcare work. Advanced systems, that would be our technology, robotics, today's conversation, quantum, all of those advanced systems, aerospace and defense. Energy and infrastructure, not just fossil fuels, but also renewable energy, as well as advanced manufacturing and all the infrastructure required to properly run an economy of any size. And then lastly, public and private institutions like government, higher education, K-12, museums, and other types of institutions that sit at the bedrock of civil society. It's a broad grouping that usually people ask me, hey, Trav, what do you not do? Generally speaking, you will not find me in the major real estate categories like office, hospitality, industrials, and so on and so forth. So that's me in a nutshell. I guess by way of background, I'm not of and from the real estate industry. I have been operating in the tech and innovation space for the better part of my career, either on the funder side. I used to run a large $1.5 billion life sciences fund here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. On the private side, within biotech companies or within not-for-profit institutions, but always, generally speaking, I've been around the innovation space for the better part of my career. It's where my passion is, where there's this intersection that I find really interesting between the public, private, and not-for-profit institutions. It allows me to stay focused on the future. In my spare time, I'm on the boards of incubators, accelerators, a couple of universities here in North America, all of which just give me a really good vantage point of what's happening in the tech and innovation space.
I'm glad you found time to spend a half an hour with me today, Travis. I don't know how you work that in.
I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, the other thing for our listeners is that BioHealth Innovation, of course, is headquartered in Rockville, Maryland, and we cover sort of the BioHealth Capital Region, Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And the listeners might be interested that you have some ties to Maryland.
I do indeed. We were catching up on that. My father's side of the family, my kin, is from the Crisfield, Maryland area. Those of you familiar with Chesapeake Bay and Salisbury, Maryland, it's about half an hour from Salisbury, right there on the water. We had a good laugh about driving down into that area as a kid. Mosquitoes as big as 747s. Lots of chicken processing plants in that area. I'd love to say that I loved those trips, but coming from where I was brought up in Brooklyn, those sometimes were hard visits, but I have a lot of love for my family and that area.
We're proud to say also that there are other elements of Maryland, in addition to where the Salisbury Seagulls are, to where basically the life science sector is the third largest biopharma cluster in the United States now. Even though you were on the Eastern Shore, there are other elements of this BioHealth Capital Region which really are centralized around some of the key industries which you have focus on and some major strengths there. And that's why we're talking today. You had mentioned something about the advanced technology and advanced systems and technology, and we're going to talk about quantum, which fits into that, but it also is very linked to that human health and advanced systems area that you talked about before. So it really overlaps with two of the areas in your major industry category.
It's a great segue into the conversation. There's so many ways to think about quantum, and it's such a technically difficult and technically specific field unto itself. But really, when you pull the lens back for just for a second, the quantum as well as AI, these are enabling technologies that are meant to be deployed, and the way that we'll gain use and value from them is through deploying them in other vertical sectors. I know we're going to get into this, but quantum itself is this intersection between all of these sectors that are on my plate, not the least of which being the life sciences, but I don't want to spoil that part of the conversation. But there is a bit of a method to my madness when I'm thinking about quantum in the context of some of the other real estate concerns and real estate interests that I have.
You pick up a really big point there, which is talking about enabling technologies. And if we all the way go back through history and where people, and I know you're a student of clusters and where clusters evolved and how everybody wanted to take advantage of clusters. But if you go back to the internet and semiconductors and biotechnology, nanotechnology, cybersecurity, now we're into quantum and AI. People didn't understand. They all thought that everybody could be a leader in every one of those technologies, but they were really enabling technologies. Sometimes hard to find a finished product, but really they supported other products as they were being developed. So that fits very nicely into this conversation today of the AI and the quantum that we're going to talk about. But if you had anything else to add about the enabling technologies' role in the evolution of these clusters and geographic regions who have benefited from having some of these enabling technologies.
I think you make a great point. I think you can even take this notion of enabling technologies and extrude it back throughout the entire industrial revolution, not just our most recent experience. When you look back at the geographies that had eminence in textile manufacturing or eminence in fishing and whaling, sitting at the core of even those economies, it wasn't just the sector itself. There was something technologically unique about the geography that allowed that sector and that geography to achieve that kind of global eminence. Here again in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and you think back to Lowell, Massachusetts, and its role being a global leader in the textile industry. It wasn't about the textiles themselves that allowed Lowell to achieve that level of economic power. It was the series of canals that existed off of the Merrimack River and the engineering that took place that allowed Lowell to transform water power into mechanical power that operated the looms. This notion of enabling technology sitting at the bedrock of economic growth is something that I don't think we give enough focus on in economic development. We always want to focus on the soprano part, not the bass part. So
I like the bass part better, and I think you're a bass as well.
Yeah, I love the bass part. That makes the song at the end of the day.
So basically, people, when they hear the quantum computing, they talk about the future. And then there's also the today. So why is it that JLL is interested in looking at quantum today and opportunities? And why should cities, states, regions, counties also be interested in quantum today when really it's just in its embryonic stage?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm very sensitive to with my portfolio is finding those aspects of the economy where real estate is tied, inextricably linked to value creation, where you just can't create value without real estate. And usually when you find those areas, there is asymmetric value for the real estate. Yeah. Because you just can't divorce it from economic value creation. A great example of that is the life sciences, where lab work and wet lab facilities are inextricably tied to life sciences and biopharma research. Generally speaking, although AI is somewhat breaking this a little bit, but generally speaking, you cannot do R&D work without a wet lab. As a result of that, you see there's extraordinary asymmetric value associated with a wet lab facility. Quantum is the same exact thing, where the value in quantum is inextricably tied to these really specific, highly engineered real estate assets. And so as the technical problem and the physics problem with fault-tolerant quantum computers is getting solved, we're rushing towards this moment of quantum advantage where quantum computers will outperform classical computing. We see from a real estate perspective that there is extraordinary value and need to focus on where these real estate assets need to be located, how they need to be built, how they need to be powered, because at the end of the day, we cannot achieve the promise of quantum without that real estate facility. So this is part of the logic model for why we in the real estate industry are so focused on quantum as a real estate sub-asset class, because it sits at the core of our ability to tap into this technology in the future.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the surrounding environment around quantum has a major impact about ideal location. So where do you think that some of the really early time uses of quantum are going to be in your four major industry categories or subsectors of those categories? And where are you focused most around what industries today?
Yeah, I think in answering that question first, I think it's really important for us to just stipulate that quantum computing is not going to displace artificial intelligence, nor will it displace classical computing. There is no such thing as a desktop quantum computer coming soon to Best Buy that you're going to be able to order off of Amazon. That's not a thing. Quantum computing also is not going to replace artificial intelligence. The gains, the extraordinary gains that you get from quantum computing really are tied to a very narrow use case where there are an exceptional number of variables that need to be processed real time. A quantum computer is not something that you will deploy for figuring out your itinerary for where you go on vacation or what movie you're going to watch with your significant, although the arguments I have with my significant, maybe a quantum computer would help. But no, generally speaking, a quantum computer is not going to be used for those tasks. But when you have these scenarios where you have an extraordinary number of variables that are all interrelated, brute force computing from AI would take years to solve that equation, that interrelated set of variables. That's where quantum will become absolutely indispensable. So what are those areas? Here are three major sectors that are chomping at the bit for quantum computing. Obviously, the government and cryptography, code breaking, securing data, so on and so forth. This is the perfect use case, and where perhaps the supermajority of attention is being paid, certainly by the government. Second is the life sciences, particularly around modeling new molecules and modeling new materials. The interplay of atoms and the interplay of those atoms in situ, within the environment, is something that even artificial intelligence has massive problems being able to sort and simply can't do it at scale. And then lastly, it's finance and insurance. And this is one that surprises people a little bit. But when you think of the role of the financial services industry and the insurance industry, insurance in particular is all about modeling. It's modeling risk, modeling scenarios, modeling weather, modeling your driving habits, modeling us, very complicated carbon-based life forms and our behaviors. And our ability to be able to properly model can lead to higher profitability, or it can lead to lower rates for us as consumers. It can lead to our ability to be able to build portfolio of financial assets in a way that is much more profitable. So the finance and insurance industry has intense interest in quantum computing from this modeling aspect of multivariable equations and algorithms. So those are the three most narrow and present tense uses that are very much interested in quantum computing becoming a real boy, as it were.
And we had a preliminary conversation to prepare for this podcast. And one of the things we talked about were the markets in the country or in the world that really have some of those assets that are necessary to actually think about being a leader in some sector of the quantum industry or capacity. And we discussed our region, Maryland, DC, Virginia, saying that generally out of the three primary areas you've mentioned, government, cybersecurity, cryptography, life sciences, finance, and insurance, we're lucky enough to have two out of the three and potentially two of the largest markets in those two out of three. So talk a little bit about how you view that and how you judge the ranking of these other cities, states, or regions around the United States or world who can be leaders in any of those three sectors.
Yeah, it's really important here to separate the research and development phase of quantum computing overall, which is that phase we're very much in the middle of. And then there's a lot of excitement. Some might say hype, but there's a lot of excitement about our ability in this R&D phase to create a fault-tolerant quantum computer or quantum computing with proper error correction. That has its own set of geographic consequences around the people, the skilled workforce, and the core facilities, the existence of those core facilities and skilled workforce to solve that R&D problem about the quantum computer itself. This is part of the reason why you see a concentration of these assets in places like Maryland or Chicago, California, Massachusetts, where there's a high concentration of engineering talent, of government and not-for-profit funding coming into research university like University of Maryland, MIT, Caltech, and the like. There is a high concentration of the skills necessary to understand the engineering problems as well as the physics problems. That's all on the R&D side. The second part of the equation that you were alluding to, though, Rich, is once we have these assets, then there has to be an ability to focus on the use cases, the entrepreneurship required around the use cases, the ability to push business models around the utilization of these assets. We're also looking for those geographies that intersect with that first set of categories, where there is eminence, existing eminence within the sectors themselves. Do you have eminence in the financial services industry, within the life sciences industry, financial services, and so on and so forth? Because ultimately, that's going to feed the economic activity that spins out of the physical asset itself. Maryland is incredibly unique because of its history within the life sciences, proximity to the federal agencies and the federal labs. It has a great environment for two of these areas in particular, the cryptography and the government use in the life sciences. So when you look around the United States in particular, where quantum is emerging, it's this intersection between the two, between the physical and the business case and the business use that seems to drive most of the concentration of activity and, frankly, our optimism when we rank these environments going forward.
I think that's a very good case that you make about Maryland, and we're a little prejudiced here, but the University of Maryland in College Park has 400 computational and quantum scientists. 400 is a lot of assets in one location, and that's probably why IonQ, which was the first pure quantum company to go public, spun out of the University of Maryland and still is their headquarters is in Prince George's County in College Park around the University of Maryland. They continue to invest there because they know the talent's there to support their future growth needs. So,
absolutely. I'm so glad you picked that up because we can talk for hours about EMI shielding and vibration sensitivity and all of the physical attributes of quantum real estate. But at the end of the day, the rate limiting factor of our ability to accelerate with this enabling technology is skilled workforce. Even right now, where we certainly haven't even hit our stride in quantum, only 1 out of 3 of these quantum jobs get filled. Only 1 out of 3. So we're struggling under the weight of lack of proper workforce to operate these quantum facilities. And those geographies that can quickly gain weight with skilled workforce will find that they will win going forward the quantum race. This happens every single time. Going back to our conversation about enabling technologies, you see this is played out over and over again over hundreds of years. We tend to focus on the real estate asset itself, but when it comes time to deploying and creating businesses, it's skilled workforce every single time. That's the rate limiting factor.
Let's talk a little bit more about what else is required other than the workforce. So if you're looking at quantum site selection, what does a company need in a building or the campus surrounding them to support quantum computing? How does that change really the priorities that companies need to make in making these major decisions? And, we're in this major debate about data centers now. And so the question becomes, is there any relationship between quantum and data centers and the interaction between the two or not?
It's a great question. And I think some of those questions are still playing out real time, Rich, but just generally speaking, a couple things. One is there is no such thing as no monolithic single technology around quantum computing. Quantum computing is actually at least 3 or 4 different types of modalities, each having its own specific physical requirements. What we can say, the pattern that certainly is emerging, is you have to have geographies and real estate that are built to a very high stringent specification around energy and energy utilization. These facilities require a lot of clean energy, vibration sensitivity, and floor loads. So you're not going to, generally speaking, have the ability to place these sorts of buildings on top of subway lines or fault lines or things of that nature. These qubits are highly sensitive. They are the atomic world's equivalent of the Princess and the Pea. There are requirements around EMI shielding and electromagnetic shielding to ensure that these qubits don't create undue and unnecessary errors. There are physical requirements and attributes that when you think about them and the specifications required, you actually start to narrow down geographies pretty quickly. They are different from data centers, which have a higher tolerance for variability than a quantum computer does. But at the same time, depending on the modality, depending on the quantum modality, there is an opportunity for co-location with a data center that is located in the right geography. So it's the punchline, Rich, is quantum computers are not going to displace data centers. They will coexist with data centers.
So how does a company determine whether or not they have to invest in their own quantum computer or utilize a shared quantum computer that may be located anywhere else in the world? It doesn't have to have immediate proximity to use that computer. So what's that make buy decision versus share somebody else's existing capacity?
It looks a lot like the conversations that are occurring right now as it relates to data centers. The supermajority of data centers are being built by the hyperscalers, Meta, OpenAI, things of that nature, because the cost of these facilities not amenable to a smaller company. Smaller companies, you engage with a co-location center and where you're taking space in an existing data center. That same basic principle will apply, and it certainly has been applying as it relates to quantum. Of the 255 quantum facilities that JLL has mapped around the world, somewhere around 80% of those are government funded. That's the nature of these facilities. They are so expensive and at such an early stage, still in the midst of R&D, that this notion that a private company will somehow find the funds to not only build a quantum computer and build a quantum facility, but then sustain it through the next 5 years while we figure out error correction and the physics problems that still remain, it's generally speaking not an option. You do have some of the large companies like IBM, Google, and the like that have their own quantum computers, but that route is generally speaking foreclosed to the ordinary corporate masses.
And you mentioned 255 quantum facilities around the world. Rather than just looking at Maryland, let's look at the United States. How is the United States positioned from a competitive standpoint right now as you look at China, Europe, and other locations in the world that are investing big bucks in this?
That answer is not exactly entirely clear. There's a degree to which our knowledge of what's happening in some countries like China isn't entirely clear. So we don't really have a sense, Rich, of what capabilities exist there. I can say, and analysis does certainly seem to suggest that as it relates to the Western world, both based on volume of facilities and capabilities, that the United States is in pole position, as it were, and certainly at the top, if not leading the rest of the Western world in our quantum capabilities and the distribution of quantum assets around the country. The punchline here, though, is there's still a lot we don't know, and the world doesn't know about certain countries and their quantum capabilities. This, in the moment of time it has taken us to have this conversation, new discoveries have occurred that are not geographically bound. So this is a story in mid-flight.
And I think since we're really interested in the life science and the biohealth industries, we've been trying to do some analysis, and I've shared some of that information with you about where general quantum computing is versus some of the niche quantum applications lie. And maybe that's where people need to spend more time focusing, is where can they be a leader in some of these emerging niches where there are great use cases, as you mentioned, versus being in the general quantum computing category. I don't know. What's your perspective on that?
I think so, Rich. I completely agree. These niche areas are an opportunity to enrich, in the biohealth region in particular, to enrich and gain even more leadership in these vertical sectors, not necessarily to narrowcast on the quantum computing as a physical asset. And at the end of the day, the biohealth region, you want to remain and retain your leadership in the life sciences. An aspect of that is quantum computing. You want to remain and retain your leadership in cryptography, advanced systems, and some of these other edge case uses. An aspect of that means you have to be a leader in quantum computing. And so I think from an economic development perspective, from a sectoral growth perspective, I think the focus has to be both and, not either or.
Okay. And so the key is, what are the greatest risks now that Maryland might have some leading position within some elements of the life sciences and quantum computing? Plus, when you look at defense and cryptography, you've got NSA and DOD and DARPA and everybody else in the backyard. So what are the greatest risks? Because as we look at history, the United States or regions have lost leadership because they didn't do certain things. So what is it that regions, cities, companies need to do to retain their leadership and protect their position going forward?
I think it's elements of what we've already talked about, Rich. One is to read the room. Our leadership in quantum is a function not only just of the physical asset itself, but our ability to create the workforce pathways and the skilled individuals that will be able to both operate as well as capitalize upon this new enabling technology. That's not a physical thing. That's something we can do right now in partnership with UMD and the other academic institutions, partnership with our community colleges and two-year colleges. Really rethink what skilled workforce pathways exist that will allow us to capitalize on quantum in 3 to 5 years. If we don't do that, we'll constantly and consistently be chasing after this aspect of need in the economy, while other geographies that are focusing on it, for example, Colorado's got a great program that it has launched with its community college and two-year college program around quantum and quantum real estate management, essentially, will be chasing behind these other geographies that have taken the time to focus on the human element of quantum. That's number one. The second risk is that we get complacent or slow down. We are still in the R&D phase, and it's going to take a little bit of intestinal fortitude. It's going to take some leadership on the part of political leaders in the capital region, as well as local leaders, to continue to invest in quantum, knowing that we are still 3 to 5 years out from it yielding the type of extraordinary and transformative commercial value that a quantum computer will yield. We slow down now, or if there's an interruption, or if there's a gap, that's the kind of thing that takes us from being in the first tranche of leaders and puts us in the back of the pack.
We're speaking with Travis McCready, the head of industry's Leasing Advisory for JLL. And Travis, you couldn't have hit the nail on the head more for a message that needs to be delivered, because I'm involved in the Life Science Advisory Board. Governor Moore's appointed people to look at where Maryland should be positioning itself for the future in the life sciences. Quantum's a component of that. How do you advise leaders, political leaders in the United States today, whether at the state, federal, local level, who all have budget deficits right now and have suffered based on losing a lot of federal funding at academic institutions, medical centers for future research? So it's a very agonizing position to be in. How do you prioritize an investment in the future that's not going to be able to yield direct benefits today? And as you say, it's 3 to 5 or even 10 years out. But if you don't make those investments today, 3 to 5 or 10 years out, you've lost. You're not in the game anymore. So how do you balance that? And when you got to balance the budget, how do you get the piece of the pie to go into these emerging technology sectors that could be the future?
Talk about a problem which is quantum in nature. I spent a little bit of my time, as I mentioned, in state government and saw the gut-wrenching challenge of building a state budget. And I give all elected officials a real pass when it comes to the problem of balancing and creating a budget that responds to the needs of the citizenry today, redressing aberrant needs from the past, but still preparing for the future. That in and of itself is, not to be too cheeky, is a quantum problem. But I think the way I see it is this. In 2024, the private sector deployed somewhere order of magnitude of $10 billion in the United States alone towards quantum. We're modeling that by 2030, so in 4 short years, investments will start to crescendo towards around $20 billion. And this is just private capital going into quantum. So private dollars are being deployed right now, today, as we speak, on a bit of a hockey stick shaped curve. And so when you're thinking about building a budget or deploying government resources to be able to accelerate our leadership in quantum, part of the thought process, I think, is how do we ensure that my state, my geography, my municipality gains access to those private dollars? How do I participate in an extraordinary velocity of investment, private capital investment into quantum? We're really not to think of it in terms of displacing other investments, but maybe harnessing or capitalizing on workforce investments, education investments, or other types of investments that can be thought of in the context of quantum and still achieve the goals that we want for our taxpayers. I think that's perhaps one way of thinking about it. But again, not my area of expertise, Rich, and I have the utmost respect for lawmakers who have to wrestle with these problems, whether it has to do with quantum or not, in trying to position their state and position the United States for the future while still caring for individuals in the present.
I agree with you that industry needs to step up and lead. And really, I think the winners are going to be private-public partnerships, where you have government, academia, industry, NGOs all working together for a common good, where all they have different missions, but they understand at the end, if they work together, they can leverage resources and not be dependent on one source. And I'd like to get your perspective on one last thing before we close this, Travis, and that's, R&D is extremely important with emerging technologies. But it's my perspective, we're focused on this every day with what we do at BioHealth Innovation. But I think the states, regions, companies that excel in commercialization of quantum are going to be the real winners in the future, not the people that are just doing pure R&D. But if you can't find a way to get some commercial products into the marketplace or support people with enabling technologies to get them products into the market, then you're not really going to be successful.
Rich, again, this is one of these principles that I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with and have gotten, far be it for me to say they've gotten it wrong, but I think that too many people have misinterpreted or misunderstood the tension that must exist and the relationship that must exist between basic research and translational research towards commercialization. Basic research is absolutely crucial. We need to be funding a system of individuals who are asking difficult problems, probing the very nature of the universe, probing the very nature of chemistry, biology. We have to have a robust system that allows for that level of basic research and curiosity. For the sake of our economy, at the same time, again, both and, not either or, at the same time, there's a different skill set that we must invest in. And that skill set is our ability to look at that knowledge, to look at that basic research and ask ourselves, is there a product within here? Is there a problem that this can solve? Does that solution create commercial viability? And if there is, what is the process by which that translation will occur? How do I price the problem? How do I price the model? Who is the customer? How do I fund and build a company around it? That in and of itself requires a level of skill, a different level of skill that has to coexist with our ability to engage in great basic research. You can't do one without the other. And I really think this is something that we have to lean in on in the BioHealth Capital Region, where there's such extraordinary basic research taking place. But our economic future in the Capital Region requires us to re-examine whether or not we have the right skills and the right people that have the capability and the capacity to translate those basic principles, that basic research, into viable commercial products and companies. That is what will separate the BioHealth Capital Region's economy from the economies of other states, countries around the world.
What a great summary and closure to a interesting topic that nobody totally fully understands. And we're all learning more each day as we progress with quantum. So I know we could go on much longer, Travis, but this is a very good introductory 101 on quantum computing and economic development and leasing activities. And I want to thank you for being on BioTalk today. But before we close, is there anything that we didn't discuss that you want to leave the listeners with, since we have the floor now?
We don't need quantum computing to know where the best crab cakes are in the United States of America, maybe. But again, that was the best part of coming on down to Chrisfield.
We mentioned the BioHealth Capital Region Forum, September 15th through 17th, which is going to be in Rockville. If you show up and we invite you, we'll get you some crab cakes, Travis.
Done and done.
Okay. So I want to thank Travis McCready, the head of industries and leasing advisory for JLL, for being on BioTalk today. And this will be not the last time that we talk. Thank you, Travis.
Sounds great. Thanks, Rich. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.